Story time about my psychotic best friend. So we're gonna call this girl Gia. So a little background information. This all happened whenever I was in 9th grade. I saw Gia sitting at this lunch table alone and I invited her to come sit with my friends and I. And after talking to her, I found out that she was a new student and she didn't have any friends. So her and I started hanging out and we became really close. Like, she would come over my house 24/7. Well, my older sister was a grade above us and she would act really weird around her. And by weird, I mean like she would always make fun of me in front of my sister. And weirdly enough, try to cause problems between us. My sister didn't really like her. She thought that she was weird, but because she was my friend, she was being super nice to her. Well, like a month later, she started trying to become best friends with my sister. Like any conversation she would have, I would be like, oh, do you want to come over? She would be like, no, sorry, I'm hanging out with your sister today. And I would go home and I would be like, hey, are you hanging out with Gia today? And my sister would be like, what the hell are you talking about? Like for part 2. Part 2 about my psychotic best friend. So like I said, my sister was like, no, what are you talking about? So at this point, I'm thinking, oh, this girl's really weird. But it gets even worse. She comes over my house one day to hang out with me and goes in my sister's room the whole time. My sister dyed her hair black, so what does she do? She dyes her hair black too. The obsession was like really fucking weird. Anyway, so the one night that Gia's over, yes, I still had her over after this because I didn't think it was really weird at the time. My sister had her boyfriend over and they were in the living room watching a movie, and the whole time Gia is begging me to go in the living room and watch the movie with them. So I'm like, fine, whatever, we'll do that. We go into the living room, we all sit on the couch, and my couch is kind of small, so like we all had to squish. So she sits her ass right next to my sister's boyfriend. Well, my sister's boyfriend got up and started freaking the fuck out. Well, turns out that Gia was trying to touch him under the blanket. So I told her to leave. Next day, I got a whole paragraph of her saying that she just wanted to be like my sister because she never had an older sister. Story time about how my husband accidentally told me that he was cheating on me. So just some background information. My husband and I got engaged 2 years ago. And this whole situation happened a month after we got married. So fast forward, it's a Sunday morning. Well, usually every week on Sunday, I clean the whole house. So I woke up, went into the bathroom to take my ring off, and I could not get it off. Mind you, I had gained a little bit of weight since my husband and I got engaged. Anyways, I tried butter, I tried soap, I tried everything, even oil. So after trying to get it off for an hour straight, my finger was 3 times bigger than it usually is. So at this point, I'm really scared that I'm going to have to get it cut off. Because 1, I didn't want to ruin it. And 2, it was really expensive. So I call my husband and he's like, oh, call your dad. Firefighters always know what to do. So I called my dad and thank God he lived 5 minutes away because he drove over really quickly. Like for part 2. Part 2 of how my husband accidentally told me that he was cheating on me. So like I said, my dad lived 5 minutes away, so he just rushed over to my house. And we tried a few more things to get it off. We tried Windex, we tried the dental floss, none of it was working. So my dad told me that we were going to have to cut it off with pliers. So he comes over with the pliers, cuts the ring off. Well, a few days later, I had taken it to the same place that we got it to get the band fixed. Or replaced. While I was there, I decided to get it appraised. Just for insurance reasons. So a few days later, I go and pick up my ring, and when I get home, I look at the appraisal. It was not the same one that I had picked out in the store. It looked exactly like it, but there was like a $20,000 price difference. So right now, I'm like, what the fuck? I'm not mad about the money part. I'm more mad that my husband lied to me. I was more upset about the fact that he had lied to me. So I had made dinner reservations for the next night, so that way I could hopefully bring up the conversation about it, like for part 3. Part 3 of how my husband accidentally told me that he was cheating on me. So like I said, I had made reservations for him and I to go out to dinner so that way I could hopefully spark up the conversation about it. So when we finally sat down, I had started up the conversation. I had told him that when I took my ring in to get it fixed, I also got it appraised. And his face immediately changed after that, but he wasn't saying anything. He was like, oh, okay, how did that go? So at this point, I was tired of beating around the bush and I was like, why wouldn't you just tell me if we were having money troubles? And he was like, what do you mean? We're not having any money troubles. I'm fine. One thing about my husband is that he is very wealthy. And he takes pride in the fact that he is very wealthy. So obviously, me right there kind of questioning his wealth, he fucked up and told me the truth. He was like, well, I'm going to be honest with you. I accidentally gave the ring that I was supposed to give you to a girl I was seeing at the time. And I just never got around to replacing yours. So fast forward to present day, I am currently moving all of my stuff out of our house and filing for divorce. Crazy story time about the girl that my dad was having an affair with. So a little background information. My mom and my dad had been married for 10 years. And they had 3 children. Me, who's the oldest, I'm 16. And then my 2 younger sisters. Well, since I was 12 years old, I've lived with my grandma. Because of some personal issues that went on at home. Well, because I live with my grandma, I barely ever saw my family. Because she lived like an hour away. So I was never in any family photos or anything like that. Well, when I was 15, my dad started coming to my grandma's every Friday and taking me out for pizza. And I thought it was because he just wanted to spend time with me. Well, a few months after he started taking me out for pizza every Friday, I found it really odd that he was getting a hotel for the whole weekend and only seeing me on Fridays. So I had talked to my grandma about it. So my grandma told me that he was having an affair. And she said that she didn't care because she absolutely despised my mom. I didn't tell my dad that I knew because I just thought that it would cause issues between us. Well, the next Friday he came up and we went to the pizza place like for part 2. Part 2 about the girl that my dad was having an affair with. So like I said, a few weeks later, on a Friday, he takes me out for pizza again. Mind you, we go to the same pizza place every single Friday. Well, we sit down, we're waiting for our pizza, and I notice that there's this girl who keeps staring at me. And I'm like brushing it off, thinking that she's just one of those girls who has an RBF, resting bitch face. So once we were done eating, my dad went to pay. But the pizza place that we were at, they only accepted cash and not card. My dad had to go to the bank, which was like 2 doors down, so it really didn't matter. As soon as he got up and walked out that door, the girl who was staring at me the whole time came straight over and sat down where he was sitting. I'm like, hi. And she just starts going off on me, but not so everybody could hear. She's like, what the fuck is your name? Like, is he cheating on me? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I'm his daughter. She says, no, you're not. He showed me pictures of his daughters before. Like I said before, I wasn't in any family photos. Like for part 3. Part 3 about the crazy ass girl that my dad was having an affair with. So like I said, she comes over, she sits down. She thinks she's confronting me about being just some random girl that my dad's cheating on her with. And then like I had said earlier, I was not in any family photos because I had lived with my grandma for years. So she was like, oh, like, no, he showed me pictures of his kids and stuff like that. So because she thought that I was lying, she went up and tried to fight me. But I grabbed this bitch by her hair and I fucking dragged her. And of course, while I'm beating the shit out of her, my dad walks in. He's like, oh my God, what are you doing to her? Let her go, blah, blah, blah. Everybody else is freaking out at this point. We get kicked out. The cops get called. She goes to jail because originally she put her hands on me and I decided to press charges, even though my dad begged me not to. So then I confronted him about the fact that he only came up once a week to spend one Friday with me, but he got a hotel and spent the whole weekend with her. So now I still live with my grandma. I don't see my dad anymore. He's still having an affair with this girl. I'm still really pissed off about it, so I kind of just want to tell my mom what he's doing. Story time about why I made my boyfriend stop being friends with his girl best friend. So a little background information. I was in my sophomore year of high school, and my boyfriend and I had been dating for about 6 months. And he had been best friends with this girl, we're gonna call her Addie, for about 3 years. Now, I had known Addie way before that, probably since we were in kindergarten. But her and I weren't like BFFs, we were more of acquaintances. But obviously we became friends because she was always around my boyfriend. A month after him and I started dating, I decided that we had to set boundaries for their friendship. Because they had first period together, right? Well, every morning at 9:45, I would go on Snapchat and I would see a picture of them. And it would be her kissing him on the cheek. Not only would it be on her story, but it would also be on his. And I had her on Snapchat before that. She had never done that, ever. So he said that he had talked to Addie about it, right? And things were good for the next 2 months. Then they were forced to work together on a project. Like for part 2. Part 2 about why I made my boyfriend stop being friends with his girl best friend. So like I said, they had been forced to work together on a school project. At least that's what he told me. So I brushed it off because I was not about to seem like the jealous girlfriend. Well, the next day, him and I were supposed to go out to the movies. So I texted him right before we were about to leave, and I said, hey, are you on your way to get me? He goes, OMG, no, I'm sorry, I forgot. I have to work with Addie on this project. She's about to come over my house. So at this point, I'm like really pissed off. So I text him and I say, I thought you guys had a whole week to work on this project. Why does it have to be tonight? Addie knew that him and I were supposed to go to the movies that night also. He said, we just want to get it done really quickly so that way I can spend the rest of the week with you. And she's snapping me the whole time that she's at his house off of his phone. So at around 1:30 a.m., I get a Snapchat from her on his account and she's laying on his chest. Like for part 3. Part 3 about why I made my boyfriend stop being friends with this girl best friend. So like I said, she snaps me at 1:30 in the morning, a picture of her laying on his chest, and it's captioned, hey girlie, I hope you don't mind, but I have to spend the night at his house. He lost track of time working on our project, and it's way too late for him to take me home. So at this point, I'm furious, and I don't snap her back. So the next morning, I call my boyfriend. And I asked him, hey, is Addie still there? So he says yeah, and then I ask him to put me on speakerphone. So when he does, I say hi to Addie. She goes, OMG, hey girl, how are you? And that's when I pretty much go off on this bitch. I tell him that while he was asleep, she was sending me pictures of her laying on top of him off of his Snapchat. and that she was sending those type of pictures to multiple people on his Snapchat, because my best friend had texted me that morning saying that she thought that we broke up because Addie was sending her pictures of her laying on top of him. So I tell him, pick me or her. And she starts crying. After a minute of silence, he hangs up the phone and then blocks me. Good luck to the next girl. Storytime about the 2-year-old boy who lost his life at the Pittsburgh Zoo. On a Sunday morning, a mother decided that she was going to take her son to the zoo. Everything was going good until they had gotten to the wild African dog exhibit. I'm going to insert a picture of what it looks like right here. On both sides of the exhibit, there was plexiglass. But looking straight out into the exhibit, there was no glass. They also had a roughly 4.5-foot railing there. Well, as most parents do whenever they take their children to the zoo, pick them up so that way they can get a better look at the animals. Well, this mom had an idea of standing her child up onto the railing, get a better look at the dogs. Now, me personally, I have been to that zoo before. There are many signs saying not to lean over or set your child onto the railing. Well, in an instant, her child had lunged forward, and she had accidentally let go of him. At 11:45, her child had dropped 10 feet down into the dog enclosure. A few seconds later, the people around her had went to get employees. But by that time, the dogs had already gotten to the 2-year-old boy. Like for part 2. Part 2 about the 2-year-old boy who lost his life at the Pittsburgh Zoo. So like I said, she had dropped her child into the exhibit, and by that time the dogs already got to him. As soon as this happened, visitors went and told the employees. Shortly after, zookeepers were able to call off several of the dogs, and they had immediately went back into the building. 3 more were eventually drawn from the child, but the last dog was very aggressive and the police had to shoot the animal. The father soon arrived at the scene, and after the mother and father were taken to the hospital for immediate trauma therapy. Since the exhibit opened in 2006, USDA had conducted over 35 inspections on that exhibit, and none of those times did they decide that it was unsafe. And this situation happened in 2012. Parents decided to sue the zoo in May of 2013. In court, the mother had argued that the zoo had failed miserably to prevent the attack. And this is what the zoo said. This was caused because of the mother's negligence and carelessness. I'm going to tell you guys my opinion real quick. I think it's the mother's fault. What do you guys think? Part 2 about the 2-year-old boy who lost his life at the Pittsburgh Zoo. So like I said, she had dropped her child into the exhibit, and by that time the dogs already got to him. As soon as this happened, visitors went and told the employees. Shortly after, zookeepers were able to call off several of the dogs, and they had immediately went back into the building. 3 more were eventually drawn from the child, but the last dog was very aggressive and the police had to shoot the animal. The father soon arrived at the scene, and after the mother and father were taken to the hospital for immediate trauma therapy. Since the exhibit opened in 2006, USDA had conducted over 35 inspections on that exhibit, and none of those times did they decide that it was unsafe. And this situation happened in 2012. Parents decided to sue the zoo in May of 2013. In court, the mother had argued that the zoo had failed miserably to prevent the attack. And this is what the zoo said. This was caused because of the mother's negligence and carelessness. I'm going to tell you guys my opinion real quick. I think it's the mother's fault. What do you guys think? Storytime about the scariest night of my life. A lot of background information. So the one weekend, my sister and I decided that we were going to go to my stepdad's, and her best friend was going to come also. I was around 13 at the time. Well, my stepdad and my mom had been broken up for about a few months, but my dad was okay with us going to our stepdad's because he had been with our mom for around 7 years and he's always been good to us. And my stepdad's was 2 hours away. So fast forward, we get to his house, and my sister and her friend wanted to go to a party. Now, me being older now, I knew that they didn't want to bring me because they were around 16 and I was only 13, but I still tried to tag along. Well, they weren't really talking to me or anything, and I hadn't seen my mom in almost a year. So I told my stepdad that I wanted to go and see her, which was a super big deal because she absolutely hated my stepdad. And she didn't want him around us. And by the way, she lived like 5 minutes from him. So if she found out that we went all the way up there to see him and not her, she would have flipped. So he drives me to my mom's house, like for part 2. Part 2 about the worst night of my life. So before I got to my mom's house, I called her. And I pretty much just told her that I was with my stepdad and I wanted to come see her. Like I said, she lived 5 minutes away. So as soon as we pull up, she walks outside. And she starts screaming at my stepdad. She's like, "Those are my kids. You're not allowed to see them, blah, blah, blah." Even though my dad had full custody and he could decide who we could and couldn't see. So after that, we walk in the house. She isn't saying anything. And this house is pretty much like a trap house. There was a knife holding the door shut. Not a kitchen knife, like an actual knife that you stab people with. She's like, "You can sit down, make yourself comfortable." And I didn't want to sit down because I saw needles everywhere and I just saw a rat crawl under the couch. So I was like, "No, I'm fine." And then she was like, "Sorry, not everybody can be rich like you." Which, just to make clear, I'm not rich. I just knew that she was doing drugs with her boyfriend in that house. After that, she pulls the knife that was holding the door shut out and points it right at me, like for part 3. Part 3 about the worst night of my life. So before she points the knife at me, she had been in the kitchen, right? So I went to go and sneak out the door. That's whenever she ran over, ripped the knife out of the door, and pointed it right at me. And she's like screaming a bunch of shit at me. And she's like, oh, what, are you gonna tell your dad that I pointed a knife at you? And I told her, yeah, like, what the fuck do you mean? Am I not gonna tell him? So at this point, she tries to take my phone. I told her, no, you're not taking my phone. And at this time, my sister's also texting me and yelling at me because she had told me that I should not go to my mom's house. Probably for that exact reason. A few minutes later, she hears her boyfriend pull up. I had never met her boyfriend. Like I said, I haven't seen her in probably almost a year. As soon as she hears him pull up, she looks at me and she says, go out the back door. She literally hurries up, takes me to the back door, and I have to run out the back door. I don't even know where I am. My sister and stepdad were waiting at the gas station across the street, so I ran over there really quickly. And then a few things happened after that. Let me know if you guys want a part 4. Part 4 about the worst night of my life. Just a little side note, I am in bed, so it's going to be a black screen, and you can probably hear my dog snoring. I'm just going to go from my point of view the rest of the time because I texted my sister, but I think she's sleeping. So pretty much I had to call my sister after my mom told her to go out the back door. And there was a Sheetz right across from where she was. But since she had to go out the back, she just saw like all woods and no gas station. So I got on the phone with her. She runs over to the gas station. And when we get back to my stepdad's house, we call our dad and let him know what happened. And the police actually got involved. And they had called my dad because my mom had called them and told him a bunch of stuff that just wasn't true. Like saying that my stepdad was a pedophile and stuff, just like saying stuff that could actually ruin this man's life. And usually my stepdad would come pick us up and then drop us back off. But the police said that my dad had to come get us tomorrow morning, even though he had full custody and could decide who we could go with and stuff. So my dad came the next day and picked us up.
Storytime about how I was manipulated by a nurse in a psych ward. When I was 19 years old, I was admitted to a psychiatric ward for women for attempting to unalive myself. Most of the other women there were also there for this reason and for personality disorders. We were long-term patients who were held there against our will for our own safety. Me and some of the other women had our favorite staff members, one of which was a male nurse. He was 35 years old, seemed nice, always had our backs, and would often talk about his son in personal life. This made us all feel comfortable with him. Some days, a group of us would be allowed to go off the premises with a staff member and hang around the town for 2 hours. However, some things weren't allowed, such as using the phone while we were out in case a phone call upset us, or mood-altering drinks such as energy drinks or alcohol. Since our freedom was restricted most of the time, we'd always ask for him to be the one who took us. He would let us buy drinks and go off on our own. He would also let us use a phone to make calls to our family, buy us food and cigarettes. He even drove back the long way so we wouldn't have to be back so soon. At the time, we didn't really know why he would be so nice and lenient because he could lose his job letting us do those things. However, one day out of the blue, he was suspended, and this is when we found out what was really going on. Part 2 of how I was manipulated by a nurse in a psych ward. When he was suspended, we were all confused. It turns out that he was getting sexual favors from some of the women in exchange for giving us more freedom. Some of the women were so unwell that they didn't know what he was doing was wrong. We were all sectioned off and they were extremely strict with us since we didn't have the capacity to make rational decisions. This gave them power over us. After all, we were in a place that was meant to keep us safe. The only reason it got out is because one day, another staff member was searching a patient's room and found a phone. Once confronted, the patient admitted how they received the phone and what they had to do for it. He was manipulating us so that in return for our freedom, we would have to do something for him. Some of us were shocked because he always talked about his son who was 5 years old telling us about their weekends. He didn't seem like a monster. Luckily, it never happened to me, but it happened to the friends I made there. After he was suspended, some of the women had to take it to court. It was obviously traumatic as they were already there for serious mental health issues. Some of the girls had to have additional therapy for it as well since it was essentially assault. We never found out what happened to him or if he went to prison. Sadly, one of the girls I know is still very traumatized by it. This is how a phone call from my mom saved my life. When I was 15, I started working weekends at a skate park over the summer and I was the only female employee there. They'd host a ton of events and rock shows. These events were extremely fun and all my friends would hang out there for a good time, so we got to know the owners pretty well. The two guys who owned the shop were in their 40s, overweight and balding. Their names were Doug and Mark. Doug was married with kids, so he was always more serious about the business and rarely joked around. However, Mark was a single dude who was outgoing and silly. He was always joking around and pretty chill, so we always had a fun time with him around. There were a few red flags that I ignored, such as how Mark came up to me at one of the events and picked me up, tickling me and spinning me around. I awkwardly laughed it off, but I was creeped out. Another time, I noticed him giving me flirty looks and sticking his tongue out at me. It felt inappropriate, but I shrugged it off thinking it was all in good fun. That was until one day when the fun stopped. Mark called me to the back room. Doug was on a phone call in the front, and when I got to the back room, Mark picked me up and set me on a washing machine. This is when he tells me he wants to kiss me. I automatically shut him down. He then tries to persuade me to lift up my shirt for him. Again, I tell him no and hop down, proceeding to walk towards the front, thinking that was it. I had no idea how much danger I was really in. Part 2 of how a phone call from my mom saved my life. Doug opened the door and asked what we were doing, followed by asking if Mark showed me their butterfly collection. I awkwardly said no and walked out. Around 5 o'clock, Doug asked me to go with Mark to run some errands. All I could think about is how awkward the ride was going to be, as we hadn't talked since the incident. Mark drove us to the other side of town to my high school. We pull in the back parking lot on a Saturday. I asked what we were doing there, and he said he was scouting for a new area for a skate park behind the school. He gets out of the car and motioned me to go with him. Then he leads me to an area with dense forest-like woods. He urges me to go with him into the woods, telling me to take his hand to show me the spot. At this point, I'm panicking and debating on making a run for it. That's when my cell phone rings and I quickly answer it. It was my mom, and she asked if she could come pick me up early to go to dinner. With a sense of urgency, I tell her, yes, I'm at the high school, come get me now. I think she heard the fear in my voice because she made it there in 5 minutes. I told Mark my mom was on the way and I had to go, and he seemed pissed. He walked with me to the front and didn't say bye. My mom picked me up, asking if I was okay. I was in shock, but said yes. I went straight home and quit that very day. I'm 100% convinced that he was planning to do something terrible to me in those woods. Storytime about how a guy I hooked up with posted me on an explicit website. In the summer of 2018, I was a senior in high school and worked at a bike rental shop. I was always kind to the customers, but also careful not to be too friendly. One day, it was a few minutes before closing when this group of college guys came into the shop to rent out some bikes for the week. I gladly helped them with the rental and got all the bikes ready. As I was sizing them up and chatting, all the guys were being really friendly and telling me about all their fun plans. I finished getting their bikes ready, and before they left, they asked me for my Snapchat. I never gave out my personal information to customers, but I let it slide because these guys were so fine. I started talking to them on Snap over the next few days, and one of them caught my eye. His name was Tom, and we just clicked. He was easy to talk to, and he would even come by the shop to say hi every now and then. We were flirting with each other a lot, and he finally asked me to hang out with him. During our first hangout, he invited me back to the rental house where all of them were staying for the week. I spent the night, and we hooked up. The next morning I left, and throughout the week we kept messaging each other like normal. Things seemed to be going great until I woke up one morning and saw a heart-dropping text from Tom. Part 2 of how a guy I hooked up with posted me on an explicit website. When I woke up in the morning, I saw a text from Tom. When I read it, my heart dropped and I felt like I was going to pass out. In his text, he said, "Thanks for the content," followed by a link to an explicit website. When we hooked up, he asked if he could record it. I was into that kind of thing, so I agreed but made sure to tell him I didn't want anyone else to see it. When I clicked the link, I saw that he had posted the video on this website and it was already racking up views. I was mortified. I tried to text him and the other guys, but they had already blocked me. To make matters worse, the following week, everyone at my high school found out about the video. I don't know how they got a hold of it, but I'm guessing someone came across it and recognized me. The whole school was sharing it and talking about it, and I was so embarrassed. Then I was called into the principal's office along with the guidance counselor and my parents. I ended up getting my phone taken away for a month, followed by my boss giving me a lecture about why we don't give out personal information to our customers. We contacted the police, but we never heard back from them, and it ended up being a dead end. Even though my parents were furious, they were still understanding. Thankfully, we were able to get the video taken down. I never heard from Tom or those guys again. I have a bearded dragon named Phil who I've had for about a year now. My whole family deeply loves him, and my younger sister Jane loves making TikToks with Phil. Yesterday, my sister came and showed me a TikTok she made of him. There's a trend where people put butter on dogs and an audio saying "butter dog" plays over it. Jane had done the same to Phil. It made me really upset because I had seen a video of someone explaining that this trend can be dangerous towards bearded dragons. This is because the butter sticks to their skin, and if they're put under their basking light, it basically heats up and burns their skin. I told Jane to delete the video and that she can't do stuff like this with Phil. I quickly got him out from under his basking light that she had put him back under and bathed him, trying to get the butter off. My sister said I was overreacting and that it's a fun trend. I snapped at her and told her that I'm not letting her near Phil until she apologizes and promises not to do trends like this again. She got angry and told me that she wasn't apologizing for just wanting to have fun with him and I had no right to take him away from her. I put Phil back in his tank in my room and told her that she's not allowed to come take him anymore. My parents found out this morning and they're on her side. However, if she hadn't shown me the video, then Phil would have sat in his tank getting burned under the basking light and I wouldn't have known until it was too late. Am I overreacting? I ordered a lock for Phil's tank and put it on once I got it so that my sister couldn't just get to him. I waited a bit to see if she would apologize, but she didn't. I sat my parents and sister down to go over again why I wasn't allowing her to see Phil and how what she did wasn't okay. I made a slideshow and everything about how putting butter on a bearded dragon was harmful. I told her that I wasn't mad at her for doing it because she didn't know any better, but I was upset over how she reacted. It took a lot of explaining, but after a lot of talking and a little bit of arguing, it seemed like they finally understood. My sister got upset and apologized for how she reacted. It seemed to genuinely upset her after she realized what she did to Phil and what could have happened. My parents also apologized for not taking my side and scolded me for what rules I had set in place. The lock is staying on the tank just in case, but my sister can see him and play with him if she asks me. However, she isn't allowed to make videos with him if I'm not there to watch her do it. She seems a bit irritated but follows the rules. I also got her to take down the video. She ended up making another video about how it was stupid of her to do it in the first place and warned others against it. Phil is okay and playing around as always. Story time about my Hills Have Eyes moment in Texas. I was driving from New Orleans to Oregon. It was just me and my year-old pit bull in a 14-foot U-Haul truck crammed with everything I owned. I was driving on a lonely stretch of highway through central Texas when I realized I hadn't seen a town or exit for a long while. My giant U-Haul was running low on gas and I was starting to freak out. That's when I saw a small town coming up. I gassed up and I'm ready to go, except I cannot for the life of me find my way back to the highway. I circled the town 4 times and I start to get frustrated because I can literally see the highway but I can't get back to it. I decided to go into the gas station and ask the attendant for directions. There's a skinny guy with black hair dangling in front of his eyes that looks like he could use a good wash. When I ask for directions, he's a little rude. He never looked up and kept looking down at the magazine, but gave me directions that didn't sound right at all. He told me to follow a road that would get me to the highway in 17 miles. I was dumbfounded. I point out that I didn't drive that far from the highway to get into town and I can see it from here. He seems annoyed and gives me some explanation about the road curving around that doesn't really make sense. When I got to my car, my body was trembling violently and my heart was racing, seemingly for no reason. I had the most terrible feeling and I didn't know what to do. Part 2 of my Hills Have Eyes moment in Texas. I had the worst feeling about the attendant's directions. I decided to trust my gut and not follow them. However, this was the only store in this tiny town and I was stuck. Suddenly, a big red beater of a pickup truck pulls up. This huge Texan man in a flannel and work boots gets out. Without even thinking, I hop out and ask him for directions. I think he could tell that I was upset because he made me laugh and cheerfully told me there was a hairpin curve turnoff right at the end of the small concrete tunnel that I had passed several times. He said it often confused travelers because it was so hard to see. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I asked him how many miles it was to the highway. He gave me a funny look and said it's a quarter mile at most. At this point, I couldn't help myself and asked where the directions that the attendant gave me would lead. The Texan man looked at me intently and asked me how I knew about that route, so I told him. He then asked me what the attendant looked like and pulled him out from his truck. He said it would have taken me away from that interstate and led to a deserted area with junked cars and mobile homes all owned by the same family. This family was known to the locals as troublemakers, meth heads, and worse. He said the attendant was also part of that family. Thankfully, I trusted my gut and I was saved by a ruddy, scruffy-haired Texan angel. Storytime about the craziest thing I saw while working at a mental health facility. I work in a mental health facility as a psychiatric technician. My job is to help people with mental health distress by providing emotional support, helping develop positive coping skills, and provide medical attention. Some of the individuals that I treat have severe mental illness, which can lead to violence. One day I was assigned to a patient that I'll never forget. He was on a 24-hour observation because he was self-harming and deemed high risk. He had tried to harm others earlier in the day, so he was locked into a padded room with only a bed, a bathroom, and a tear-proof blanket. I was assigned to watch him for the day from outside of the room to ensure that he wouldn't harm himself until he could be seen by a doctor. He was talking about things that made absolutely no sense, running around in circles inside of the room and asking me if I was Jesus. He would start screaming at the top of his lungs about random things, curse at me 1 minute then apologize the next, and kept spinning on the window just to wipe it off a few seconds later. I attempted to calm him down, but he was on a rampage. At one point, he turned his back to me and appeared to be rubbing his eye for some time. However, when he turned around, I almost passed out. He had ripped his eyeball completely out of the socket and began tossing it up and down in the air while calmly singing to himself. The situation only got worse from here. Part 2 of the craziest thing I saw while working at a mental health facility. The man continued throwing his eyeball in the air and catching it while calmly singing slow jams. In disbelief, I immediately called for the guards to come and help me. As they came running, I told the man to stop playing with the eyeball and put it down. He then flashed me a smile and put his eyeball close to his mouth. I knew where this was going, so I begged him not to do it. He proceeded to put his eyeball in his mouth and began intensely chewing it. The guards unlocked his door and rushed in. He was jumping and running around trying to avoid them. When they finally got him restrained and under control, they told him to open his mouth and spit out the eyeball. Sure enough, he quickly swallowed it. I asked him why he would do that, and he told me that President Ronald Reagan told him to. He said it's okay because he still has another eye left and he could see just fine, and that he only wanted to have one anyway. That's when the ambulance arrived to come and take him to the hospital. When the paramedics asked him what happened to his eye, he proceeded to throw up on demand in front of everyone. He pointed to his chewed up eyeball and the pile of vomit on the floor and asked them if they could put it back in his eye socket for him. After going to the hospital, he was transferred to a different facility for a higher level of care. To this day, whenever I see someone rubbing their eye, I get squeamish.
So a lot of people argue that you should never look through your man's phone. But like, what if you just have that gut feeling that something's going on? And even worse, what if you do open his Snapchat and see a naked girl? So I downloaded this app called Wink and made a friend that we can call Shane. And even though Shane and I got really close over the phone, he lived in another state, so we never really got to meet. But one night he was coming home drunk from a hotel with his cousin, and I was coming home from a college party, and I said his cousin, who we can call PJ, was hot AF. And so Shane was like, oh my God, let me give you this man's snap. And a few months later, PJ and I were talking. And he agreed to drive the 4 hours to come to my state just to see me. I was busy cleaning my apartment that day preparing for him to come and told him just to walk in when he gets here. So when this man came in, I kid you not, he walked in with a bouquet of flowers. And they were a dozen yellow roses, which he knew were my favorite. And after he left on Sunday, he asked if he could see me the next week, and I happily said yes. And before long, PJ and I started dating, but this happiness was soon to end. So welcome back to me finding nudes on my boyfriend's phone. I'm sorry, ex-boyfriend now. But seriously, guys, do not be love blind because this guy literally was driving 4 hours to see me every week. He would call me on all of his breaks. All of my friends were completely won over by him. And it didn't take him long to win over my family too. And about a month in, he finally took me to meet his friends and family. Our lives meshed so well that he asked me to move in with him at a party that night. I was hesitant at first, but then I packed up all of my stuff out of my apartment and moved out of state to be with this man. And after all of that, this man switched it up on me.
He stopped taking me to parties with him and started leaving on Friday afternoons while I was at work and wouldn't tell me where he was. He wouldn't come home until like 6 or 7 in the morning on Saturday. And then we would just argue the rest of the weekend about it. Like, sir, I moved away from my family, moved out of my apartment, quit my job for you. He was straight up treating me like it didn't matter, and I saw him going to his phone all the time and acting secretive. And eventually I couldn't take it anymore, so I opened his phone when he was sleeping. So part 3 to me finding nudes on my cheating boyfriend's phone. I also forgot to mention this giant red flag. We were no longer active. Like, this man had cut off our sex life. So when I grabbed his phone, the first Snapchat that I opened was from a girl who was touching herself. My heart stopped for a second, but I was like, okay, let me just give this man the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it's just some girl trying to be sneaky, trying to pull one over him. But then I noticed that all of the recent snaps were from girls. So I started to go through all of his conversations and realized that he was messing with every girl on his Snap. Every! And then there was this one girl who didn't have like sexual messages with him. They were more like lovey-dovey. But it went back to way before we were dating, so this man had never been faithful to me. I broke down, I blocked every girl on his Snap, and then I threw his phone at his face to wake him up. I demanded to know why he cheated on me, and that's when he realized that I'd blocked all the girls and he freaked out and lunged at me. We got into an all-out brawl, and I broke my hand in the process and locked myself in the guest room. I think this is part 4 to my boyfriend cheating on me with every single girl on his Snapchat. So this is, of course, where this man just, sprinkled on a little bit of his gaslighting. I locked myself in the guest room, and then he started to cry and act pathetic from the other side of the door. Just saying that he was sorry, that he effed up, and he never meant to hurt me, and it was all his fault. And in that moment, I didn't know what else to do. I unlocked the door and cried in his arms, terrified. And I needed to go to the hospital because my hand was literally broken from our fight. Because I had given up everything and I was so in love with him, I decided to work things out, but it literally only lasted a week. We made the decision to break up, but he convinced me to keep living with him. But we set up ground rules, which included no girls over at the apartment and him not talking bad behind my back. But of course, one night when we went out to a party, we got into a massive fight and he caused a scene. And he talked so much smack about me at this party that his friend, who's a girl, turned around and was like, hey, you need to come live with me. I packed up my things and left, but I ended up moving in with Shane, the cousin, instead. And then I got really drunk one night and slept with Shane. So, like, for the next part. My ex cheated on me with every single girl in his Snapchat. So you might be wondering, what happened after I slept with his cousin? Well, I felt awful because then me and PJ got back together a week later. You probably want to slap me, but he was different this time. He was caring, he was gentle, but literally I was not happy anymore. Everything felt so wrong. I decided to move back home with my sister, and as soon as I did, PJ started cheating on me again. And as soon as we broke up, I found out that I was pregnant. He ghosted me and left me to figure out things on my own. So I blocked him. And sadly, about a month after finding out I was pregnant, I ended up miscarrying. And PJ ended up getting a new phone and started texting me and calling me and blowing up asking to talk. And that's when I realized he didn't even know that I had lost the baby. So I decided to end up talking to him and he tried to get me back. I was extremely confused during this time. I continued to move on and away from him. But then he started just harassing me on TikTok. He would admit to cheating on me in the comments, like bragging about it. And now he has a girlfriend, so I hope someone warns her. If you have a story you'd like to share, follow me and DM me on Insta. You guys are not even gonna believe it when I say that when I was 15, I almost became a stepmom. Yes, we did skip a few chapters, so let's start from the beginning of the book. Back in the day, in middle school, there was this new bad boy in town. And for the purpose of the story, his name will be Dean. So Dean was a little bit older, but he would date some of the middle school girls. A little sus, I know, but even beyond this man had a bad reputation. And I did my best to stay away from guys like him. That was until the second quarter of my sophomore year in high school happened. And while my mom and I were walking around Walmart looking for a pair of jeans, we ran into Dean's mom. Well, our mom started talking and bonded really well. And that's when his mom suggested that we would be a really cute couple. She talked about how much he's changed, so I went ahead and added him on Snap. And the insane thing is that we actually started having really good conversation, like deep existential ones. But one night I was bored and started to creep on his Instagram account, and I came across a gender reveal photo. This man had a whole son on the way, and I accidentally liked the photo, and that's when I got a text from Dean saying, "Go ahead, ask me." So part 2 to me almost becoming a stepmom at the age of 15. So when he asked me about liking the gender reveal photo, I just decided to go ahead and play it dumb and be like, what? And then he tried to act like that text was meant for someone else. And then I go, are you sure you didn't want to ask me about your kid? He was literally so embarrassed and thought that I would think of him differently. But he told me that him and that girl broke up, so I honestly didn't care. I was just like, so I could potentially be his stepmom. And he was like, yeah, I would actually love that. So we continue to snap and talk as normal and start to date. I caught feelings for Dean so hard. But one night when we were snapping, I got really excited and opened it up. And it was some girl. It said, who the F are you and why are you snapping my man? I was like, me and Dean have been talking. And she was like, I'm his baby mama and girlfriend. So I literally told her everything that this man had said to me and that he was in love with me. But then I blocked him on everything because I didn't want to break up their family. Ladies, if a baby mama is involved, always do that little extra bit of stalking to make sure they're really not together. Follow my Insta. Have you guys ever had just little random things go missing from your house? It happens a lot and you just don't really think anything of it. But what if those things started to show up at your doorstep? That is exactly what my stalker did to me. So as all scary stories start, I met a guy on Tinder. And for the sake of the story, I feel like his name should be Ted. So Ted and I really hit it off and dated for 3 months, and that's when he asked me to be his girlfriend. I of course said yes, but that's when I saw a switch in his personality. He became this very dark, controlling figure in my life and kept me from seeing any of my friends and family. Once I realized this was emotional abuse, I left. And he was eerily calm about the breakup, which was not consistent with his controlling behavior. And around this time, I started to get anonymous packages delivered to my house. And they contained stuff that had been missing from my home. I tried to brush it off, but couldn't help but think it might be Ted. But that's when I got a text from Ted's best friend saying that Ted had passed away in a car crash. So I ruled him out, but that's when more weird things kept happening. The anonymous packages kept showing up, and then I noticed a car would follow me everywhere I went. Storytime part 2 to my stalker sending me missing items from my house. After I got the text message that my ex had passed away in a car crash, I immediately ruled him out. Like, there's no way you can be dead and sending me packages. And then I started to notice anytime I would leave my house to go run errands, this one car was always there. They would always follow close or park next to me. And sometimes I would even think that I could see Ted, but I thought I was just imagining it because I was dealing with his loss. But then I started to get texts from a random number, giving me information about where I lived, what I was doing. So I obviously blocked it. And then hundreds of new numbers would start to text me, and I couldn't keep blocking them all. So I finally talked to my mom about it, and she made me go to the police. That's when the officers tracked one of the numbers back to Ted's house, which really confused me because I had already grieved his loss. But the officers let me know that he was very much alive, and they went to go arrest him and found him in my neighborhood in the car that I had seen following me, which was stolen and had photos of me all over it. If you guys have a story you want to share, follow me on Insta. The best thing to bring two girls together is being cheated on by the same man. So this is my best friend, and around the beginning of February last year, she got into a relationship with a man. And we'll go ahead and call this guy Bronson. So they had known each other for about 2 years prior and had talked on and off. But February of last year, they finally decided to get together. And he was like her ideal man. He was tall, Sagittarius, and had a country accent. And let me just tell you, he even charmed all of her friends. I straight up thought he was so good for her. That was until the bachelorette party. So she was a bridesmaid and I was a maid of honor in a wedding. And we noticed while we were out, her text messages got muted. And so we decided to look at his Snap location. And it was not where he was usually supposed to be. Spence texted him the next morning and was like, hey, did you cheat? And he completely denied it. So we chose to believe him until he fessed up 2 days later. We literally found the girl's TikTok later that day. He said he wouldn't cheat on her again as long as she didn't cross state lines again. And that remained true for 2 months. Part 2 to my best friend meeting her roommate. So even though Bronson had cheated on her, they decided to go ahead and try to make things work. Sometimes people make mistakes in relationships and things can be fixed. 2 months went by and everything seemed fantastic. This leads us to our date night. So Spence and Bronson were both asleep, but then she woke up to his phone literally blowing up. She went over to go check it because Bronson wasn't waking up, and it was just one of his guy friends blowing up his phone. So being worried that he might be in trouble or some kind of danger, she went ahead and decided to pick up the phone. Well, a girl answered on the other end. And it wasn't just any girl. It was his ex-girlfriend. And she was just as confused as Spence was. So they were still seeing each other while she thought that Spence was just a friend and Spence thought that she had been totally blocked. But he had just changed her ID contact to one of his best friend's names so that she wouldn't question anything. We'll call her Ashley, and they decided to meet up to discuss everything. And long story short, they ended up kicking him out and moving in together. But if you want more details on that, we can give a part 3 and 4. Follow me on Instagram if you want to send in your story. So in the summer of 2020, my baby daddy was working as a salesman. But obviously, there is a lot that can go wrong with this. So at the time, we were making bank and getting that bag. Literally, I kid you not, $5,000 every couple of days. So you can say we were doing pretty well for ourselves at that time. But one particular night that he had a sale, I had a really bad gut feeling. These people asked to meet him about a block away from our house, and this sales product was worth about $3,500. But he had already made about $1,700 this morning, so I was kind of concerned about this next sale. I was laying in my room about to tell him not to go when he just went ahead and left. And that's when I heard yelling from down the block. I was like, oh my God, and I looked out my window and there was 4 guys surrounding him with masks on. That's when I heard my baby daddy yell for me to bring the money. I immediately said okay and started to rush to grab everything. As I was running down the stairs with the money and approaching them, I noticed that one of the guys had a gun to the back of my baby daddy's head. Follow my Insta for part 2. Storytime part 2 about my baby daddy having a bad, sale. So as I start to go to them, they start to head up the stairs to me. And as we're approaching each other, I can see that one of the guys has a gun to the back of my baby daddy's head. Another guy has a knife to his throat, and the other one just looks like he was the muscle of the group. They were literally walking to come to our house. I made sure it was entirely pitch black within my place so that they couldn't see anything that was there. And I just brought them the money. I was like, take it, here it is. And he just stared at it. And then I said a little bit louder, take it. And he was just looking at it. And then I screamed, take it, it's here. And that's whenever he took the money and started to push my baby daddy up the stairs. I was pushed to the side as they looked around to see if they could take anything else. But they obviously couldn't see anything and just left. Neither of us slept for several days, thinking that they would probably come back. But thankfully, they never did. My baby daddy is still a salesman to this day. We're just more cautious, and I'm working on getting my education so I can get a steady job. If you have a story, DM me on Insta. Story time about the craziest party my boyfriend ever went to. So his best friend TJ called him saying that there was a party going on in another town. Him, having just went through a breakup, was really upset and was in the mood for a party. So TJ picked up him and his friend Ava and went to the town to pick up another friend who played basketball. It was about 9 o'clock when they got there, and they had all already pre-gamed with Henny. And because he was so upset, the alcohol was hitting. He had also listened to hella Drake. And all the guys were just in the mood for a fight. And Jeremy honestly thought Ava would shut things down if it got too crazy. But little did he know. So the party was at this massive rented building, and they had to wait 30 minutes for someone to come and let them inside. However, Ava went in ahead of them because a guy thought she was cute. And once they walked in, they saw just how nice the place was. Everything smelled of alcohol and weed, and the place had an amazing view. There were gorgeous windows all around, and so many celebrity basketball players showed up. So they knew that they were in, and they were gonna go get more drinks at the bar. But TJ was so drunk he was gone. And his friend inside the party was already hitting on a girl. Turns out she was someone else's girl. So they knew a fight was about to go down. Stay tuned and follow us on Insta. Part 2 to my boyfriend's crazy party story. I never gave a name for the guy inside the party, but we can call him Michael. So Michael was literally flirting with this other man's girl. And for some reason, these guys were like, yeah, let's fight. I don't know how boys think. Jeremy's literally hyping himself up in the bathroom, and then he hears screaming, so he knows it's time to go down. And as he stumbles out of the bathroom, ready to fight, he sees Michael and the girl's boyfriend beating each other up. But his friend group never jumped in, so TJ and him stayed back. Until security jumped in. That's when they realized the guy that Michael was fighting was probably important, because they kicked them out and not the other guys. So while they're getting escorted out, TJ starts talking back, which is when he knew things were about to get real. They knew that the other guys were getting pissed off and threatening them. The guys literally started shooting at them. So the bullets were inches away from hitting Jeremy and his friends. So Michael jumped into the front seat of the car and started to drive away. So ultimately, Ava had the best night, and she asked all of them how their night went, and they were all literally like, it was chill, you didn't miss anything. But oh well, if you guys have a story you'd like to share, follow me and DM me on Instagram.